Coming up on Network Africa. Zimbabwe's independence icon, Robert Mugabe, dies in Singapore at the age of 95. Mixed reactions trail the death of Zimbabwe's former president, Robert Mugabe, as Africa ponders on his legacies. Plus, South African President Cyril Ramaphosa condemns a recent wave of deadly xenophobic violence, says there's no excuse for anti-foreigner attacks. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Teniola Shobowale. Robert Mugabe, the Zimbabwean independence icon and controversial leader, has died at the age of 95. Mr. Mugabe had been receiving treatment in a hospital in Singapore since April. He was ousted in a military coup in 2017 after 37 years in power.
He was born on February 21, 1924, in what was then Rhodesia, a British colony run by He was imprisoned for more than a decade without trial after criticizing the government of the day.
We want full and unfettered democracy. Down with the racist constitution, down with the dirty elections, pamberi nechimrenga.
Well, Robert Gabriel Mugabe was a man who divided global public opinion like few others. To some, he was an evil dictator who should have ended his days in jail for crimes against humanity. To others, he was a revolutionary hero who fought racial oppression and stood up to Western imperialism and neo-colonialism. Our next report takes a look at the life and times of the late Zimbabwean leader.
Robert Mugabe was born on February 21, 1924, in what was then Rhodesia, a British colony run by its white minority. In 1964, he was imprisoned for more than a decade without trial after criticizing the government of the day.
We want full and unfettered democracy. Down with the racist constitution, down with the dirty elections, pamberi nechimrenga.
While still in prison in 1973, he was chosen as president of the Zimbabwe African National Union, ZANU, of which he was a founding member. Once released, he headed to Mozambique, from where he directed guerrilla raids into Rhodesia. But he was also seen as a skilled negotiator. Political agreements to end the crisis resulted in the new independent Republic of Zimbabwe. With his high profile in the independence movement, Mr. Mugabe secured an overwhelming victory in the Republic's first election. But nearly 4 decades after independence in 1980, he was perceived as power-obsessed and willing to unleash death squads, rig elections, and trash the economy in the relentless pursuit of control.
There will never be a regime change here. There will always be the people of Zimbabwe in control.
In 2000, facing serious political opposition for the first time, he seized white-owned farms to resettle black farmers, causing economic disruption but boosting his popularity among supporters. Around the same time, pro-Mugabe militias used violence to influence political outcomes. In 2008, when he lost the first round of the presidential election, attacks on the opposition resulted in his rival pulling out of the contest. However, he was forced into sharing power in 2009 amid economic collapse, installing rival Morgan Tsvangirai as prime minister.
Do swear that I will be faithful and bear true allegiance to Zimbabwe.
An unapologetic leader, Mugabe portrayed himself as a radical African nationalist competing against racist and imperialist forces in Washington and London.
The Western countries, in particular the United States and the European Union, who imposed illegal sanctions against Zimbabwe, have, to our surprise and that of SADC and the rest of Africa, refused to remove those sanctions. If they will not assist the inclusive government in rehabilitating our economy, could they please stop their filthy, clandestine, divisive antics?
But in 2017, amid concerns that he was grooming his wife Grace as a successor, the army, his longtime ally, turned against the president and forced him to step down on November the 14th.
I thank you and good night.
Before his death, Robert Mugabe had been receiving treatment in a hospital in Singapore since April. This was after he was ousted in a military coup in 2017 after 37 years in power.
Robert Mugabe, the guerrilla leader who led Zimbabwe to independence in 1980, died in Singapore. His death was confirmed by Zimbabwe's President Emmerson Mnangagwa. Officials often say Mr. Mugabe was being treated for cataract, denying frequent private media reports that he had prostate cancer.
From the effects of the global economic crisis, the Western countries, in particular the United States and the European Union, who imposed illegal sanctions against Zimbabwe, have, to our surprise and that of SADC and the rest of Africa, refused to remove those sanctions.
The former president was one of the most polarizing figures on the continent, a giant of Africa's liberation struggle against colonialism, whose rule finally ended in ignominy when he was overthrown by his own army.
I think President Mugabe was a leader. Yeah, since he was voted to be the president of Zimbabwe, he led Zimbabwe in a right way. We will say, may his soul rest in peace. He was someone who was a man of his words. He could do the right thing, although in some things he did the things not in a good way. Like the land reform program, to me, it wasn't a good thing.
This is sad news. We lost a good father. Mugabe was all right, but this Mnangagwa is not all right. It's not all right. I tell you the truth. Mnangagwa is not all right, but Mugabe was a good father to us.
Educated and urbane, Mugabe came to power after 7 years of a liberation bush war. But over the decades he was in power, international perception soured, with an increasing number of critics portraying Mr. Mugabe as a dictator.
Here in Nigeria, President Muhammadu Buhari has also joined other world leaders in commiserating with the people of Zimbabwe on the death of their former leader, Robert Mugabe. President Buhari said in a statement to the family, friends and political associates of the late Zimbabwean leader that his sacrifices, especially in struggling for the political and economic emancipation of his people, will always be remembered. He describes Mr. Mugabe as a political activist who fought for the independence of his country from colonial rule and lived most of his life in public service. Let's bring you more reactions to the death of Robert Mugabe. The U.S. Embassy in Harare says the United States extend its condolences to the Mugabe family and the people of Zimbabwe as they mourn the passing of former President Robert Mugabe. We join the world in reflecting on his legacy in securing Zimbabwe's independence. Meanwhile, China has expressed its sincere sympathies to the Zimbabwean people, government, and to Mr. Mugabe's family. China's friendship with Mugabe dates back to Zimbabwe's independence struggle, which China supported. In East Africa, Kenya's President Uhuru Kenyatta says, quote, We will remember former President Mugabe as a man of courage who was never afraid to fight for what he believed in, even when it was not popular. The president has also ordered the Kenyan flag to be flown at half-mast at the State House and all public buildings, military posts and naval centers. His Tanzanian counterpart, John Magufuli, shared similar sentiments, tweeting in Swahili, "Africa has lost one of its courageous leaders who resisted colonization through actions." Zambia's president, Edgar Lungu, says Mr. Mugabe will be remembered for fearlessly defending the continent. In a tweet, he paid tribute to a Pan-Africanist and Zimbabwe's founding father, saying his place in the annals of Africa's history is assured. Finally, South Africa's government held Zimbabwe's founding leader, Robert Mugabe, as a fearless Pan-Africanist liberation fighter. And for opposition leader, Julius Malema, he says it is important to fight and protect Robert Mugabe's legacy. In a tweet, he says, "We must not allow our enemies to tell us how to remember him. We know our heroes. May his soul rest in revolutionary peace." May soul rest in peace indeed. Let's get more on this story from the Director General, Bolitag Center for International Diplomacy and Strategic Studies, Professor Bola Akinterewa. Thanks for joining us on the program.
Thank you for having me.
Professor, Robert Mugabe, a liberation hero likened to Nelson Mandela, has largely been praised in Africa. But to some, especially in the Western world, he was an evil dictator who should have ended his days in jail for what they call crimes against humanity. How do you explain this contrast? What's responsible for it?
I think we can explain it at three levels. The first level is to admit that there is a psychology of human differences. So people must hold different views on a given thing, on a given individual. In this case, people consider different factors in perceiving people. So I do not have any qualms if people hold different opinions. The second point is that Robert Mugabe is on record to have put an end to the policy of Chimurenga. You know, this policy was put in place in 1922 by the former colonial master. It is a policy by which the land in Zimbabwe was divided into 5 categories. The most fertile, the most arable, was given to white Zimbabweans. The 4th and the 5th, which are the poorest, are given to black Zimbabweans. And this was the basis upon which Robert Mugabe took a policy stand to fight until they went for discussions in 1980 at the Lancaster. So Mugabe, when he was elected, reviewed this policy of Chimurenga and ensured that at least the black Zimbabweans are also given better land, good arable land. And this leads me to the third point. The agreement as done and as agreed to with the British in Lancaster in 1980 was that the British not only pledged to give 75 million pounds to assist, to give this as compensation to people from whom land will be taken. The British only paid 1 million pounds out of that. The outstanding up to today was never paid. So in this case, those who had fertile land and they took the land from them, at least to allow it to go around, can never like, Robert Mugabe. And those who were beneficiaries of that will like him. So you can look at this factor. Now, the Western world as well cannot but see him as a dictator. But why will a black man see him as a dictator? Where, for instance, he's fighting for the black people. Yeah. So these are some rationales for the holding of different, opinions on the person, the integrity, the personality of Robert Mugabe.
Professor Bola Quintero, I thank you so much for joining us on Network Africa and sharing your thoughts with us. Definitely, Robert Mugabe will be remembered for all the good and the bad.